Hello everyone, let me ask you something. When was the last time you felt truly alive in the bedroom with your partner? Not just the routine kiss goodnight, not just the safe and predictable touch, but that electric spark where you both lose track of time and of yourselves. That moment where the world outside doesn't exist and it feels as though you're discovering each other for the very first time again. The truth is, most couples don't talk about this. They talk about bills, children's schedules and responsibilities, but rarely about desire. And yet behind the doors of every long-term relationship, there is a silent question that lingers. How do we keep passion alive when life keeps piling on? What happy couples do differently in the bedroom is not about being younger or fitter or having the perfect body. It's not about performing tricks or comparing yourself to what you've seen on a screen. It's about something far more intimate, far more human. It's about the way they relate to each other, the way they dare to stay curious, the way they cultivate playfulness, the way they balance comfort with just enough mystery. Tonight, we're going to explore exactly that. We'll peel back the layers of what makes intimacy thrive in long-term relationships and how you can bring those same principles into your own life. Because passion is not something you find, it's something you create again and again, together. You know, one of the things I've noticed over the years, both in conversations with couples and in the quiet stories people carry inside themselves, is that when intimacy begins to fade, people rarely talk about it directly. They'll talk about being tired, about being stressed, about how life feels heavy, but beneath it all is often this deeper hunger. I miss feeling wanted. I miss feeling alive in my own skin. I miss the spark. And the fascinating part is that when I ask people what they think happy couples do differently, most of them will give me very practical answers. They'll say, well, they probably have more time together, or they must not have the same stresses we do. Sometimes they even imagine that happy couples are simply lucky, born with the right chemistry. But let me tell you something that might surprise you. It is not luck. It is not about having fewer problems or less responsibility. It is about a set of choices, often subtle choices, that couples make, especially in the bedroom, because the bedroom is not just about sex. It is the theater where desire plays out, where you explore not only your partner, but also parts of yourself that daily life doesn't usually invite. And what happy couples do differently is not to keep repeating the same script. They reinvent the script. They keep discovering, not because everything outside is easy, but because they have decided that intimacy is worth the effort. So let's start at the beginning. What is one of the very first things that makes the difference? It is this: happy couples stay curious about each other. Think about it. When you first fall in love, everything feels electric because you don't know each other yet. You ask questions, you listen with fascination, you notice small details. You see your partner through a lens of discovery. But years later, many couples stop asking. They assume they already know. I know how he likes it. I know what she will say. And with that assumption comes one of the biggest killers of desire: predictability. Curiosity is erotic. It is playful. It allows you to look at your partner not as a fixed character in your story, but as someone still unfolding, someone still full of mystery. The happiest couples I have observed are the ones who bring curiosity into the bedroom. They ask questions. They explore fantasies. They notice the subtleties of each other's body language and moods. And when they touch, they do not touch in autopilot. They touch as though they are discovering their lover for the first time. You see, curiosity keeps intimacy alive because it resists the assumption that you already know everything. It reminds you that the person lying next to you is not just the familiar spouse you have breakfast with. They are also a stranger you will never completely know. And that tension, the dance between the known and the unknown, is where erotic energy lives. But curiosity alone is not enough. There is another practice, one that is often overlooked but essential. Happy couples create space for playfulness. Now, I don't mean playfulness only in the sense of humor. Although laughter in the bedroom can be one of the most powerful aphrodisiacs, I mean playfulness as the willingness to experiment, to let go of performance, to step out of the pressure to do it right. Too many people enter the bedroom with a silent weight on their shoulders, the fear of not being enough, of not lasting long enough, of not looking good enough. Performance anxiety is the thief of joy, and it is the enemy of intimacy. Happy couples counter this by creating an atmosphere of play. They allow mistakes. They allow clumsiness. They can laugh if something unexpected happens. They don't treat intimacy like a chore or an exam. They treat it like exploration, like improvisation. And this changes everything, because when you feel safe to play, you also feel safe to express. You feel safe to show your desires, your quirks, even your vulnerabilities. Let me give you an example. A couple I once spoke with had fallen into a routine. Every Friday night was their designated time together, but it had become mechanical. They went through the motions and neither felt particularly excited. When I asked them about playfulness, they looked at me confused. We're adults, they said. What does play have to do with this? But when they began introducing small, playful changes, like role-playing, like trying new settings outside the bedroom, like using humor to ease tension, they discovered a completely new layer of intimacy. Suddenly their Friday nights were not obligations but adventures. Playfulness is not childish. It is the ability to approach intimacy with creativity instead of fear, with openness instead of rules. And the couples who embrace this are the ones who keep the spark alive even decades later. But there is one more element we need to talk about today. One that often separates couples who thrive from those who slowly drift apart. It is the way they balance closeness with space. Many people assume that intimacy is only about closeness, that the more time you spend together, the more you merge into one, the better. But in reality, desire often thrives not in constant closeness, but in the space between. You cannot long for someone who is always at arm's reach. You cannot feel excited by someone if you never experience distance. The happiest couples understand this paradox. They nurture connection, yes, but they also allow each other individuality. They don't smother. They don't demand constant availability. Instead, they recognize that a little bit of distance, time apart, separate hobbies, even private thoughts, can make the moments of intimacy so much richer. Because when you return to your partner, you don't just return as the spouse or the co-parent. You return as someone who has been living, creating, breathing in the world, and now brings that energy back into the relationship. This balance between closeness and space is one of the great erotic secrets. Too much distance and the bond frays. Too much closeness and the flame suffocates. But when you find the rhythm, when you allow yourself to miss each other just enough, desire finds fertile ground. So, as we start peeling back the layers of what happy couples do differently in the bedroom, remember these first practices: curiosity, playfulness, and balance. Together, they create an atmosphere where intimacy can breathe, where it can renew itself instead of becoming stale. And this is only the beginning, because there are deeper practices, more subtle dynamics that we are about to uncover, the kind that can truly transform not just your sex life, but your entire relationship. When we talk about intimacy, we so often think only in terms of physical connection. But what I've seen time and time again is that happy couples know that the bedroom is not isolated from the rest of their relationship. It's a reflection. What happens under the sheets is deeply influenced by what happens in the daily moments, how you speak to each other, how you handle conflict, how you show affection when there is no expectation of sex. Because here's a truth people rarely admit: sex begins long before you undress. Desire is shaped by the quality of your connection outside the bedroom. And happy couples understand this instinctively. They don't wait until the lights are off to create intimacy. They build it through tiny moments of tenderness, humor, and respect throughout the day. I remember one woman telling me that her husband had a simple habit every morning. No matter how rushed they were, he would put his hand on her lower back as she made coffee. A subtle but deliberate touch that communicated, "I see you, I desire you, I haven't forgotten you in the chaos of our life." She said those fleeting moments were more arousing than any grand gesture, because they reminded her that she was not invisible, that she mattered, that she was still wanted. This is the second great difference. Happy couples keep desire alive outside the bedroom. They recognize that foreplay is not just the 20 minutes before sex. It is the way you speak, the way you glance at each other, the way you create an atmosphere of erotic possibility in your daily life. But desire is not just about gestures. It's also about language. The happiest couples are the ones who learn how to talk about sex, not only in terms of what went wrong, but in terms of what they long for, what they enjoy, what they dream of. This is where so many couples struggle. They avoid sexual conversations out of embarrassment, or they assume that if their partner really loved them, they would just know. But nobody is a mind reader, and nothing kills passion faster than silence. Happy couples, on the other hand, dare to speak. They ask each other, "What feels good when I touch you here? What do you fantasize about but have never said out loud? Is there something you've been craving that we haven't tried?" These questions might feel uncomfortable at first, but they open the door to a deeper level of intimacy. And here is the irony: when you speak about sex, you actually make it less pressured, not more. You remove the guesswork. You bring clarity to the invisible world of desire. And in doing so, you create not only better physical connection, but also emotional safety. One man once admitted to me that for 20 years, he never told his wife he wanted her to take more initiative because he was afraid she would think less of him. When he finally shared it, he was astonished by her response. She laughed and said, "I've been waiting for you to say that. I always thought you wanted to lead." That conversation changed everything for them. For the first time in decades, they felt free to express, to experiment, to play. This brings me to the next essential difference. Happy couples cultivate honesty in the bedroom. Not bluntness, not cruelty, but a kind of tender honesty that invites openness. They don't shame each other for desires. They don't dismiss each other's fantasies. They learn to listen with curiosity instead of judgment. And that honesty becomes the foundation for deeper trust and deeper pleasure. But let's move to something even more fundamental. Beyond curiosity, beyond playfulness, beyond communication, happy couples recognize that the body remembers what the mind forgets. Which means touch is not just physical, it's emotional. We live in a world where touch has been reduced to function. a handshake, a quick hug, a pat on the back. But erotic touch is not functional. It is exploratory. It is the art of slowing down, of paying attention. And happy couples treat touch as a language in itself. They don't rush, they savor. They know that intimacy is not about racing toward an orgasm, but about inhabiting the journey. They let their hands wander. They take time to breathe together. They cultivate sensuality as much as sexuality. And this makes all the difference, because passion is not about quantity. It's about quality. Think about it. How often do you really linger in touch without trying to get somewhere? How often do you caress your partner not as a means to an end, but as an end in itself? Happy couples do this naturally. They recognize that touch is a form of communication, sometimes more powerful than words. And here's the beautiful paradox: when you slow down, when you take the pressure off, desire grows, pleasure deepens, and what might have felt like a routine act suddenly becomes alive again. Another crucial difference I've noticed is that happy couples learn to embrace change. They understand that passion is not static. It evolves with age, with stress, with health, with life's many seasons. The way you make love at 20 is not the way you make love at 40 or 60. And that's not a problem, it's an opportunity. Unhappy couples often mourn the past. They say, "We used to be so passionate, and now it's gone." They see change as loss. Happy couples, on the other hand, accept that intimacy is a living thing. It shifts, it transforms. Sometimes it is fairy, sometimes it is tender, sometimes it is quiet. But if you allow it to evolve, you discover new layers of closeness at every stage of life. I once spoke with a couple in their 70s who told me with a mischievous smile that their sex life was more satisfying than ever. "It's slower," the woman admitted, "but it's also deeper. We know each other's bodies like musicians know their instruments. There is less pressure, less ego, and more presence." That, to me, is the essence of embracing change, not clinging to what was, but celebrating what is. And this brings us to something perhaps even more profound. Happy couples, whether they know it or not, cultivate erotic imagination. They keep a sense of mystery alive, not by keeping secrets in destructive ways, but by recognizing that desire needs room to breathe. Too often, couples believe that total transparency, knowing every detail, every thought, every schedule, will create closeness. And while honesty is vital, mystery is equally important. Desire is fueled by a little distance, by the unknown, by imagination. When you leave room for curiosity, when you don't reveal every corner of yourself all at once, you invite your partner into an ongoing story. You remind them that there are still things to discover, that you are not entirely possessed. This subtle space is not about withholding. It's about keeping the dance alive between what is shared and what is yet to be revealed. So as we move deeper into this conversation, notice the pattern that's beginning to emerge. It's not about techniques or positions or tricks. It's about mindset. It's about the way you choose to approach your partner, the way you create atmosphere, the way you give permission for intimacy to be playful, evolving, and imaginative. When you begin to see intimacy in this way, you stop asking, "How do we keep the spark alive?" And you start asking, "How can I keep discovering you? How can I keep bringing newness into the familiar? How can I show up not as a performer, but as a partner willing to explore?" This is what sets happy couples apart. Not luck, not perfect bodies, not endless time, but the courage to bring curiosity, playfulness, communication, honesty, touch, adaptability, and imagination into the bedroom. These are not grand gestures. They are small, consistent practices that change the way you experience each other. And as you begin to practice them, you'll notice something remarkable. Intimacy is not just about sex anymore. It becomes a way of living together, of seeing each other, of staying alive together. It becomes the heartbeat of your relationship. What we've been exploring so far is the subtle art of what happy couples do differently in the bedroom. And now, let's lean into something even more intimate, more vulnerable, more daring: the role of emotional safety in keeping passion alive. You see, passion does not thrive in fear. It does not grow where criticism, shame, or rejection dominate. For many couples, the bedroom becomes the stage for anxieties that were never addressed elsewhere in the relationship. Maybe one partner feels judged about their body, maybe another feels unappreciated, maybe they carry unresolved resentments from daily life that bleed silently into their intimacy. And what happens then? The bedroom, which should be a sanctuary, becomes a battleground of insecurities. But happy couples do something different. They create a safe emotional climate where both partners feel free to express themselves. This safety doesn't mean there are never disagreements. It means that even in vulnerability, there is acceptance. When a man says, "I feel insecure about my stamina," or when a woman says, "I sometimes struggle to feel desirable," the other does not dismiss or criticize, but listens with tenderness. That listening alone can be profoundly erotic because it allows both partners to relax, to trust, to open themselves more fully. In fact, one of the most consistent observations I've made is that couples who thrive sexually are the ones who can speak about their bodies and their desires without fear of humiliation. They may laugh together, they may experiment, they may even fail sometimes, but they know their failures will not be used against them. That is the foundation of freedom, and freedom, my friends, is where true eroticism is born. But here's something fascinating: safety alone is not enough, because while safety creates the conditions for intimacy, desire needs something more. It needs risk. It needs a little edge of the unknown, a little mystery, a little tension. Think of it this way: love is about having, but desire is about wanting. You can deeply love your partner, but if everything about them feels completely known, completely predictable, then the wanting begins to fade. Happy couples solve this paradox by balancing safety with risk. They cultivate trust while also allowing for surprise. They know that intimacy is not only about comfort, but also about the courage to step into the unfamiliar. For some, this might mean exploring fantasies they've never shared before. For others, it might mean trying a new setting, introducing novelty into their routines, or experimenting with different dynamics of power and play. It doesn't have to be extreme. It just has to be different enough to wake up the imagination. And imagination is the fuel of desire. I once asked a couple married for 30 years what kept their intimacy alive. The wife said with a smile, "He still surprises me, not always with big things, but with little gestures, little risks. Sometimes it's a new cologne. Sometimes it's the way he suddenly kisses me in the kitchen as though we were 20 again. He never lets me forget that I am both safe with him and wanted by him." That, to me, is the essence of the balance. Now let's speak about another essential practice. Happy couples don't let intimacy be the first thing they abandon when life gets overwhelming. Because here is the truth: modern life is busy, stressful, relentless children, work, bills, aging parents, endless responsibilities. And what often happens? Couples say, "We don't have time." Intimacy becomes the optional luxury, something to be revisited when things calm down. But the reality is that things rarely calm down. Life continues full and demanding, and intimacy quietly slips further and further into the background. Happy couples, however, protect intimacy. They prioritize it, not because they always feel like it, but because they understand its importance. They know that sex is not just another task. It is a way of nourishing the relationship, of renewing connection, of reminding each other why they chose this partnership in the first place. They don't wait until they're in the mood. They create the mood by making space for each other. This doesn't mean scheduling every intimate moment like an appointment, but it does mean valuing it enough to give it time. And when couples do this, they discover that intimacy itself becomes a source of energy, a way of recharging, rather than another demand on their already stretched lives. There is one last truth we must touch on, and it might be the most profound of all. Happy couples understand that sex is not only about pleasure, it is also about meaning. When two people come together in intimacy, they are not just sharing their bodies, they are expressing affection, trust, desire, tenderness, play, imagination, all the complex layers of what it means to be human together. This is why sex matters so much even in long-term relationships. It is not frivolous. It is not superficial. It is a language, and when that language is neglected, the relationship often feels emptier, less alive. But when it is nurtured, it becomes a wellspring of vitality, a reminder that we are not just co-managers of a household, but lovers, explorers, companions in desire. So what do happy couples do differently in the bedroom? They stay curious about each other. They allow playfulness to replace pressure. They balance closeness with distance. They nurture desire outside the bedroom as much as inside. They speak honestly. They embrace change. They touch with presence. They cultivate mystery. They create emotional safety. They take risks. They prioritize intimacy. And they remember that sex is about meaning as much as it is about pleasure. And maybe you're listening and thinking, "But that's a lot. Where do I start?" Start small. Start with curiosity. Ask your partner something you've never asked before. Start with play. Let yourself laugh if something goes wrong. Start with touch. Take an extra minute to caress without agenda. These small shifts, practiced consistently, have the power to transform not just your sex life, but your entire relationship. Because here is the truth. Passion is not something that disappears with time. It disappears when we stop tending to it. But when we nourish it, when we treat intimacy not as an obligation, but as a living art, it grows. It deepens. It renews itself. And in that renewal, you rediscover not only your partner, but also yourself. So tonight, when you lie next to the person you love, don't think about whether you're doing it right. Think about how you can be curious. Think about how you can bring a little play, a little risk, a little tenderness. Let desire surprise you again. Let it remind you that even after years together, there is still more to discover. And if there is one message I want you to carry with you, it is this: intimacy is not about age or beauty or technique. It is about presence. The happiest couples are not the ones who never struggled. They are the ones who never stopped exploring. So here's to exploration. Here's to curiosity. Here's to laughter in the bedroom, and tenderness and risk and safety. Here's to creating passion, not waiting for it to come. And here's to you, because whether you've been with your partner for 1 year or 50, there is always more to discover, more to feel, more to love. If this resonates with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your experiences in the comments. Tell me what practices have helped you keep intimacy alive, or what struggles you're facing right now. And if you found this conversation meaningful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe, because these conversations matter, and together we can keep learning, growing, and loving more fully. Remember this: intimacy is not a gift that some lucky couples stumble upon. It is a practice, an art, a decision you make again and again. And when you make that decision, when you choose to cultivate it, you will find that passion does not fade with time, it deepens. When we think of passion, we often imagine intensity, fireworks, heat, urgency. And yes, passion has those moments. But what happy couples understand is that lasting intimacy isn't only about fire, it's also about rhythm. It's about knowing when to move fast, when to slow down, when to lean in, and when to step back. In fact, the happiest couples treat intimacy almost like a dance. And the most beautiful part of a dance is not the steps themselves, but the pauses in between. That is where the music breathes. That is where connection deepens. In the same way, intimacy doesn't require constant action. It requires presence. To hold, to wait, to look at each other, to breathe together. I remember speaking with a couple who told me their most powerful intimate moment was not the wildest night they had, but a slow, unhurried evening where they lay facing each other, simply touching without words, without expectation. They said it felt as if time had stopped, as if their bodies were speaking a language that no one else could understand. And that's something happy couples do differently. They understand that intimacy isn't measured in minutes or performance. It's measured in depth. But let's go even further. Another essential ingredient that separates happy couples from the rest is that they don't treat intimacy as an escape from life. They treat it as part of life itself. For many couples, sex becomes a place to avoid reality, to distract from problems, or worse, it becomes yet another task on the endless to-do list. But for happy couples, intimacy is not an interruption of life. It's an expression of it. Think about it. The way you love in the bedroom reflects the way you love outside of it. Are you attentive? Are you curious? Do you bring humor, kindness, and spontaneity? Or do you carry the same tension, the same stress, the same detachment? Passion is not created in isolation. It is woven from the fabric of daily life. This is why rituals matter. Happy couples often have small rituals that keep their connection alive. It could be a shared bath at the end of the week, a walk after dinner where hands always intertwine, a secret glance at a party that says, "We'll continue this later." These rituals build anticipation, they build connection, and they remind both partners that intimacy is never far away. One man described how he and his wife had a ritual of lighting a candle in the bedroom, not just for special nights, but often even on ordinary evenings. That candle, he said, was their signal to each other. Tonight, this space belongs to us. Simple gestures like that create an atmosphere. And atmosphere, my friends, is everything. The happiest couples don't wait for passion to strike. They create conditions where passion feels welcome to enter. And yet, atmosphere is not only external, it is also internal, which means that intimacy requires you to show up fully, not just as a body, but as a person. And this is where vulnerability comes in. Vulnerability is often misunderstood. People think it means weakness, fragility, loss of power. But in intimacy, vulnerability is power. It is the willingness to show not only your confidence, but also your uncertainty. It is the courage to let your partner see you, not the polished version, but the raw, tender, real version. Happy couples embrace vulnerability. They allow themselves to be silly. They allow themselves to express fears. They allow themselves to admit what they don't know or what they long for. And in doing so, they create a bond that is not only erotic, but profoundly human. Because what is more attractive than someone who trusts you enough to show themselves fully? This vulnerability also extends to aging, to change, to the way our bodies transform over time. I have seen couples who withdraw from intimacy because they feel embarrassed by wrinkles, by weight gain, by the natural changes of age. But the happiest couples I know approach these changes not with shame, but with tenderness. They celebrate the bodies they have, not the ones they once had. They understand that intimacy is not about perfection. It is about presence. A woman in her 50s once told me, "I used to think my husband only wanted me when I was young and thin. But as we grew older, I realized he wanted me because I was me. And when I finally accepted that, when I stopped hiding under the sheets, our intimacy became more real than ever." That acceptance, that ability to show up as you are, is what makes desire sustainable. But I want to bring in another dimension here, one that is often left unspoken: imagination. Happy couples use their imagination not to escape their relationship, but to enrich it. Desire is not just about what happens physically, it's about what happens in the mind. When you imagine your partner, when you fantasize about them, when you allow yourself to be surprised by who they are outside the bedroom, you create space for longing. Maybe it's the way they speak confidently at a work event. Maybe it's the way they laugh with friends. Maybe it's the way they concentrate while cooking. When you see your partner as desirable in the world, not just in your home, it awakens something inside you. And this is why the happiest couples give each other room to exist as individuals. They don't need to control every part of each other's lives. They allow their partner to shine, to be admired, to be fully themselves. And then when they return to each other, there is newness, freshness, desire. One man told me that the sexiest thing his wife ever did was not in the bedroom at all. It was watching her give a speech at a community event, standing confidently, eyes glowing with passion. In that moment, he said, I remembered that she is not only my wife. She is a woman, powerful and mysterious, and I get to be close to her. That is erotic imagination at work, and it is what keeps desire alive across decades. So where does this leave us? We have seen that happy couples do not stumble into passion by accident. They cultivate it with curiosity, playfulness, communication, touch, honesty, balance, vulnerability, ritual, imagination, and presence. They create space for both safety and risk. They allow intimacy to be not just physical, but emotional, spiritual, even artistic. And here is what's most inspiring. You don't need to change everything overnight. You don't need to have the perfect setting, the perfect words, the perfect plan. You only need to begin. Begin with curiosity. Begin with one new gesture, one new conversation, one new way of looking at your partner. Begin with the courage to step outside routine and step into discovery. Because what happy couples know is this: intimacy is not about doing more. It's about being more present. It's about daring to show up again and again as if for the first time. When you look at couples who are deeply happy together, who radiate a quiet intimacy that others can almost feel in the room, you might think they were simply blessed with compatibility. But the truth is far more empowering. They are not simply lucky, they are intentional. They choose over and over again to create intimacy. They cultivate it like a garden, knowing it will not bloom if it is left untended. And this is where we arrive at perhaps the most important realization of all. Intimacy is not something that just happens to you. It is something you build together. It is a living practice, a language, an art, and the happiest couples treat it with the respect it deserves. Now, here's the thing. Passion is often misunderstood as spontaneous, as something that just appears when the conditions are right. We imagine candlelight, wine, soft music, the perfect moment. And yes, those things can help, but passion is not about perfection. It is about connection. It is about being able to look at your partner in the middle of the chaos of life and still see them as your lover, not only as your co-parent, not only as your co-worker in managing the household, but as the person who once made your heart race. The happiest couples keep that perspective alive. They don't let life erase the identity of lover. They remind each other through words, through touch, through imagination, that beneath the roles and responsibilities, they are still two people who chose each other. And that choice remains alive every time they dare to nurture intimacy. I once had a conversation with a man married for 45 years. When I asked him the secret to their passion, he said something that has stayed with me ever since. Why never stopped flirting? Even when we were angry, even when life was heavy, I'd still find a way to tease her, to wink, to remind her that she wasn't just my wife, she was my woman. That playful, flirtatious energy kept desire alive, not because they never fought, but because they never let conflict erase attraction. This too is what happy couples do differently. They don't confuse intimacy with harmony. They know you can have disagreements and still have desire. In fact, sometimes the tension of disagreement can reignite the spark as long as there is respect, because intimacy doesn't require a perfect relationship, it requires a living, breathing one. But here's another truth that often surprises people. The happiest couples are not necessarily the ones who have sex most frequently. They are the ones who feel most connected, most satisfied, most alive in the intimacy they do share. Quantity is not the measure, quality is. And quality is built through presence, through curiosity, through vulnerability, through imagination. So let me ask you something. When was the last time you looked at your partner as though you were seeing them for the first time? When was the last time you allowed yourself to be playful, to be vulnerable, to be fully present? When was the last time you touched without rushing, without pressure, simply to discover? These are not rhetorical questions. They are invitations. Invitations to shift the way you approach intimacy, not as something to achieve, but as something to experience. Not as a performance, but as a relationship. Not as a duty, but as a privilege. And if you're listening to this and thinking, but it feels too late, we've drifted too far, let me assure you, it is never too late. Desire can be reignited at any stage, at any age, if you are willing to bring curiosity, play, honesty, and imagination back into the relationship. I have seen couples in their 70s and 80s rediscover passion after years of disconnection. What changed was not their bodies, but their mindset. They gave themselves permission to explore again, to laugh again, to risk again, because desire doesn't belong to the young, it belongs to the curious. It belongs to the brave. It belongs to those who are willing to keep discovering each other, no matter how many years have passed. So here is what I want to leave you with. Intimacy is not fragile, but it does require care. It does not fade with time. It fades with neglect. And what happy couples do differently is not complicated. It is not reserved for a lucky few. It is available to anyone who chooses to tend to it. They choose curiosity over assumption. They choose play over performance. They choose honesty over silence. They choose presence over distraction. They choose to keep flirting, to keep risking, to keep imagining. They choose to see each other not only as partners in life, but as lovers in desire. And you can make those same choices. Tonight, you can decide to touch your partner differently, to ask a new question, to laugh when something feels awkward, to look at them as though you are still discovering them, because you are, because no matter how long you have been together, there is always more to discover. If you carry just one truth from this conversation, let it be this: passion is not about luck, it is about practice. And when you practice it, when you dare to nurture it, your relationship doesn't just survive, it thrives. So here's my invitation to you: go back to your partner not only as a spouse, not only as a parent, not only as a provider, but as a lover. Bring back imagination, bring back the courage to be vulnerable, and watch how intimacy transforms, not into what it once was, but into something deeper, richer, more alive. Because what happy couples know is that intimacy is not about repeating the past, it's about creating the future together. And if this conversation has resonated with you, if it has sparked something inside you, I encourage you to share your reflections in the comments. What practices have helped you keep intimacy alive? What challenges are you facing right now? Let's create a space where we can learn from each other, where we can break the silence around these questions that so many of us carry. And of course, if you found this meaningful, don't forget to like the video and subscribe so we can continue exploring together the deep, beautiful art of relationships, love and desire. Because at the end of the day, intimacy is not something you stumble into. It is something you create again and again, with intention, with care and with love. And that, my friends, is what happy couples do differently in the bedroom.